Good afternoon, good morning, good evening. Under occupation, resilient women deprived of visibility, rights, and justice. This official virtual parallel event is brought to you as a part of the 70th session of CSW, the United Nations Commission on the State of Women. It's brought to you by the United Civil Society Women's Alliance, that is UKSWA, and Widows for Peace Through Democracy. Widows for Peace Through Democracy is a United Kingdom charity with ECOSOC status at the United Nations. Widows for Peace, or WPD, is the umbrella organisation for partner widows organisations developing and conflict-afflicted countries. They advocate for widows' voices to be heard at every level to implement lasting widow affirmative legal reforms. Widows, in this case, includes widows and half widows. Half widows are the women whose husbands have disappeared, or rather been disappeared. WPD recognises that the personal is political and the political is personal. I emphasise, however, that WPD is non-party political. It is an apolitical organisation. The United Kingdom Civil Society Alliance is a network organisation, and it is the mechanism by which women's rights, non-governmental organisations and civil society network and with government and with other organisations. UKCSWA works with the United Kingdom government to ensure positive outcomes at the Commission on the Status of Women, CSW, annually. And the organisation cohorts the United Kingdom civil society and non-government organisations, NGOs, delegation to the Commission on the Status of Women every year. The organisation enjoys a collaborative working relationship with the United Kingdom Government Office for Equality and Opportunity, Women's Equality Division. The United Kingdom Civil Society Women's Alliance set up the working group on women and girls living under occupation at the Commission on the Status of Women last year, that is CSW60, in March 2025. The working group conducts research, lobbies politicians, and seeks to advance the right to access to justice of women and girls living under occupation. Natalie Turney will discuss the central campaign of women and girls living under occupation after our courageous journalists have spoken. Our speakers today will represent Sudanese, Rohingya, Kurdish, Kashmiri, Palestinian, and East Congo women. We will also hear from a speaker who will discuss the contested territories of Ukraine and Russia. Our speakers are Dr. Eva Khair, Razia Sultana, Rîhab Cebû, Shamim Shawl, Raghda Daboub, Clarisse Bahekwa Mwenge. Two of our speakers will speak in their native languages, Arabic and French. We are pleased to offer advanced translation captions and request that you switch these on. Before we hear from our speakers, I would like to reference two matters that impact on women living under occupation. And these are examples from Australia. You may know that Australia was invaded by the British in 1788, and the First Nations peoples, the Indigenous Australian Aboriginal people, fought against invasion. However, the invasion continued, and First Nations people in Australia effectively live under British occupation. Two examples of the problem of access to law I would like to give you, because this is the theme of the Commission on Status of Women 70. The first relates to Pitjantjatjara land rights. The Pitjantjatjara people live in the part of Australia that is known now as South Australia and the Northern Territory. It's in that area. The Pitjantjatjara people were claiming land rights. And they wanted to do this, negotiated with the Australian government. Now, because British culture positioned men as leaders and men as those with whom one would negotiate, the Australian men team went to the Pitjantjatjara to negotiate because the Australian cultural system positions men as the leaders. They therefore went to the men from the Pitjantjatjara. Now, Indigenous Australian culture is not like that. It does not have the notion of single leaders, kings, chiefs. It has the idea that one communicates and engages in leadership in a collective way. One Indigenous person cannot speak for all in Australia. Now, when the men from the Australian government went to discuss land rights with the Pitjantjatjara, speaking with the men from the Pitjantjatjara community, you can see how that impacts on the Indigenous Australian culture, because they cut the women out. That is, the Australian government cut the women out, the negotiators. The second example I'd like to give you relates to the Ngarrindjeri women. The Ngarrindjeri women, there was a proposal to build a bridge from Hindmarsh Island across to the mainland, again in the South Australian area. And the Ngarrindjeri women said it's women's business on Hindmarsh Island to interfere with, and the bridge will also interfere with the communication between the water and the sky. So they didn't want the bridge. Now, Doreen Katinuri was one of the women who was involved in this case as a Ngarrindjeri woman. The case went to the Supreme Court, to the Federal Court, and there was a Royal Commission into the Hindmarsh Bridge. But I just give you this example because it indicates how women are seen as incredible, as not to be believed. In the common law system, the best evidence is evidence that comes from the people themselves, from witnesses, oral evidence. However, Doreen Katinuri was very well aware that oral evidence from her as a woman may not be paid it ought to be paid. So she went to the library to do some research. This led to two issues. One, because she'd been to the library to do research, that she was somehow making it up. Number two, male anthropologists' investigations were taken as what existed. And because those male anthropologists said there was no women's business behind Hindmarsh Island, their words were taken as the words of truth, of credibility, even though we would know why on earth would Ngarrindjeri women tell women's business to male anthropologists. I've given you the these two examples as they relate specifically to women's rights, women's access to justice, and the issue of living under occupation. Now, I was to introduce Margaret Owen. Margaret Owen OBE is founder and president of Widows for Peace Through Democracy. She is a barrister and human rights lawyer in BR Chambers. Margaret was to deliver a brief call to action to commence today's event. If she comes on, then we will be able to introduce her to give that call to action. But I would like to pay particular tribute to Margaret Owen because it is a consequence of the existence of Margaret Owen and her political nation, her lawyer's brain, her vigour and her energy that this seminar is going ahead.
Thank you very much. The Honourable Dr. Jocelynne Scutt is a barrister and human rights lawyer, former judge, and she joins us today as the chair. I will intervene to introduce the speakers while her internet connection restabilizes, but we will hear from her with some closing remarks towards the end. It's unfortunate that at the moment Margaret Owen OBE can't join us. She has a parliamentary meeting later on today, and we're hoping to hear her intervention at some stage this afternoon or this morning, depending on what time zone you're in. So I'll begin by introducing our first speaker, Dr. Eva Khair. Thank you, Dr. Eva, for joining us today. Dr. Eva Khair is a British Sudanese medical doctor and global health and humanitarian consultant. Dr. Khair has worked tirelessly on Sudan for over 10 years, focusing on crisis response, civic and human rights, and humanitarian issues. She works closely with civil society organizations and grassroots groups to bring about change. She's the founder and director of the Sudan Transnational Consortium, a global network of Sudanese professionals dedicated to peace building. She is also a research and policy advisor on Sudan, advocating on bilateral, multilateral, and media platforms. She is the founder of the #WomenForSudan Global Solidarity Campaign, highlighting the war's impact, particularly on women and girls, and pushing for meaningful protection of civilians. Dr. Khair is a parliamentary advisor on Sudan and former health and human rights diplomat to the United Nations. I'll hand over to Dr. Eva. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Natalie, and to the Honourable Justice Scutt. Very grateful to Margaret Owen for bringing me to this event, and thank you to Widows for Peace Through Democracy and the UK Civil Society Women's Alliance for convening this really important discussion and platforming Sudan. Women and girls living under occupation often exist in what we must call justice vacuums, spaces where law collapses, protection disappears, and accountability is absent. In these environments, violations are not incidental, but systemic, repeated, and enabled by impunity. Sudan's women today are living under such conditions, whether under occupation by paramilitary forces across the Darfur states and under repressive military control in other parts of the country where the de facto authority lies. The recent fall of El Fasher, the capital of North Darfur, resulted in the massacre, mass rape, and displacement of thousands. These events have been described by the UN fact-finding mission on Sudan as bearing the hallmarks of genocide, including the war crime of intentional starvation during an 18-month siege. But beyond these headlines, there's something equally devastating, and that's the near total absence of justice. Women and girls are not only surviving violence, they're doing so in a context where there is no recourse, no protection, and no meaningful pathway to accountability. I want to bring this into focus through the words of a young woman currently living in Tawila camp, not far from El Fasher. She shared her testimony with me under the Women for Sudan campaign, under a pseudonym, Zainab. She's 31 years old, a psychologist, law student, and the founder of a feminist organization. She was displaced from El Fasher after the 18-month siege. And she writes, "Here in the camp, we are not living a life. We are only trying not to die. Water is scarce and unsafe. Food is almost non-existent. Food prices have become unimaginable, far beyond anyone's ability to afford. Women and girls are trapped with no source of livelihood. Many were forced during the siege to eat tree leaves, and some families survived only on leftover animal feed and skins just to stay alive. At the same time, there is no work, no income, and no money. Shelter is nothing more than fragile cover that protects neither from heat nor from cold, nor from fear. But the greatest pain is not what we see, it is what we carry inside. As a psychologist, I live this suffering twice over. I see women and girls carrying unbearable trauma, silence heavier than words, and eyes that have lost any sense of safety or future. In the midst of this devastation, I have pledged myself to provide daily psychosocial support to a group of young women who survived rape, including girls who are pregnant as a result of this violence. I sit with them at every opportunity, listening, holding space, and trying to save what remains of their humanity, because this kind of support here is not a luxury, but a matter of life or death. Her account is not only a story of suffering, it is a stark illustration of what happens when justice systems completely collapse. This is the lived reality of women and girls under occupation in Sudan. They face conflict-related sexual violence with no access to justice. They experience displacement without legal protections or recognition. They risk trafficking, exploitation, and forced marriage in conditions of extreme vulnerability. Many are widowed, without rights, support, or social protection. Entire generations of girls are growing up outside education systems and legal frameworks. And this is how cycles of oppression are sustained, not only through violence, but through the absence of accountability and protection. So what must be done? First of all, we must recognize and address justice vacuums as a central feature of conflict and not a secondary concern. This requires strengthening international accountability mechanisms, including support for evidence collection and prosecution of atrocity crimes. Ensuring that conflict-related sexual violence is investigated and prosecuted as a matter of urgency, supporting legal pathways for survivors, including access to documentation, legal aid, and survivor-centered justice mechanisms. And second, governments must prioritize protection and legal frameworks in their response to this conflict. And this includes embedding women, peace, and security commitments into all diplomatic and humanitarian engagement, supporting inclusive peace processes where women are meaningfully represented, investing in local justice initiatives and community-based protection programs, and ensuring that widows and displaced women are recognized within legal and policy frameworks. Funding must shift to those who are already responding on the ground. Women like Zainab are providing frontline support in the absence of formal systems, and yet local and women-led organizations remain chronically underfunded. Flexible, direct funding is essential to sustain psychosocial support services, protect survivors of violence, and rebuild community-based protection systems. And finally, there is a role for everyday citizens and civil society globally. Justice doesn't begin and end in courtrooms. It includes visibility, advocacy, and pressure. So amplify the voices of women living under occupation. Support the organizations working directly with affected communities. Advocate for your governments to prioritize accountability and protection on Sudan, and challenge the invisibility of crises like Sudan. Support the Women for Sudan campaign to continue sharing these stories, amplifying the messages, and engaging at parliamentary and diplomatic levels, on media and civil society platforms, and of course, crucially, engaging the general public to increase awareness, understanding, and solidarity with Sudan's women. Because silence and invisibility are the conditions that allow injustice to persist. Zainab ended her testimony with these words: "This testimony is not a complaint, it is a cry. We are only asking for the bare minimum of human dignity: food, water, shelter, safety, and psychological support that restores to women and girls their right to life." Right to life. the most fundamental tenet of justice. Women and girls living under occupation are not only victims of violence, they're victims of systems that have failed to protect them, recognize them, and deliver justice. But they're also leaders. They're documenting, they're supporting one another, and they're sustaining communities under immense hardship. So our responsibility is that their courage is met with action to close the justice gap, to restore protection, and to ensure that dignity, rights, and accountability are not optional, but guaranteed. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Eva Khair, for your intervention. So important to emphasise the criticality of visibility, of survivor co-created mechanisms, and the danger of silence, amongst many other critical points. Thank you. If anyone has any questions or comments for Dr. Eva, please do put them in the chat. But before we move to our next panelist, I'm going to return to Margaret Owen OBE. We are so grateful to have her join us before her important meeting this afternoon. Margaret, over to you.
Hello, all of you. I'm so grateful to Natalie to put this webinar on, because there are millions of women and girls all over the world living under military occupations whose voices are never heard, and they're certainly not heard at any CSW, nor the one that's going on here. It's difficult to actually talk and speak and name and shame the countries who are responsible for military occupations in which women and girls are so targeted in all sorts of ways. We should really be concerned about them, because it's time now that we ask the UN to appoint a special UN special rapporteur to address them. I'm thinking about all the women and girls living in places like Gaza under Israeli occupation. And now I'm afraid it looks as if they're living under occupation in Lebanon. That's just starting now. The Kurds who are living under occupation by Turkey and jihadists in Syria. The women in Eastern Congo under the occupation of the M23, backed by Rwanda. We talk about the women in Kashmir, and I'm so good that my friend Shamim Shawl is here. The women in Kashmir under the military occupation of India. The Rohingyas, and I'm so glad that we've got the wonderful Razia here. The Uyghurs in China, the Tamils in Sri Lanka, the Hazaris, and the Biafrans in Nigeria. And all of them, the women and girls, are not only are they targeted with sexual violence and abductions, we're hearing now that in Syria, the women and girls under the Rojava are being taken, abducted, and given as trophy gifts to emirs and officials. They are made stateless, and even when they flee their own country to be in refugee camps, such as in Bangladesh, and Razia will tell you all about what is happening in Bangladesh. I think there are over 20 refugee camps in Cox's Bazar. They're also denied essential services. They've lost their citizenship. They can never go home. And they are without citizenship in these countries they flee to. They are denied essential services, health, housing, and education. And I used to be talking all the time about widows and wives that are missing, people who don't know where their loved ones are, whether they're in a mass grave or in a prison. But then I realized, no, don't just talk about widows and the half widows, talk about all the girls denied education, the girls who are forced into child marriages, who are having babies when they're 11 or 12, the terrible thing that's happening in so many countries. So let's all come together to actually demand from the United Nations that they appoint a special rapporteur and that we bring all these testimonies together. I've just been reading the incredible book about rape by command, about what happens in Myanmar, what's happened to the Rohingya woman. And we want these testimonies to be published everywhere. I won't say any more now because I want to hear the rest of you speaking. But thank you for all that you do everywhere. And I know the trouble is that none of these countries will ever admit to being military occupiers because they have the pretense that these are the countries that they own or have a right to. And this is where we are now with a male-led board of peace that is actually a threat to the United Nations and which is responsible for us losing our rule-based world order, but we women will bring it back. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Margaret Owen. Margaret's contribution is really supreme, and we thank you very much, Margaret, for being able to be here today and be able to stay with us for a period before Margaret dashed off to Parliament to campaign in the wonderful way that she does as a barrister.
Thank you so much, Jocelynne, and thank you to Margaret for your intervention. I'm so pleased that you managed to join us. So our next speaker is Razia Sultana. Razia Sultana is a Rohingya feminist activist, researcher and founder of RW Welfare Society, which is known as RWWS. Born in Myanmar and raised in Bangladesh, she works on issues affecting Rohingya women and girls, including trauma, sexual violence, and trafficking. In 2018, she established RWWS, which began with a psychosocial support and resilience building program for women in Cox's Bazar and continues to support these women in refugee camps. As a senior researcher with Kaladan Press, she has interviewed hundreds of Rohingya refugees and authored key reports including Rape by Command 2017 and The Killing Fields 2018, documenting systematic sexual violence and atrocities against the Rohingya. In 2018, she addressed the UN Security Council on sexual violence in conflict. In 2019, she received the US International Women of Courage Award for her advocacy and research, and we are honoured to hear from her today.
Thank you so much. And thank you, Margaret, for invitation and everyone. Hello, this is Razia Sultana, and I'm a Rohingya. Rohingya woman, a displaced Muslim minority from Myanmar, Rakhine State. The old name is Arakan State. Faced several hardships due to ethnic persecution and gender equality. Many have reported witnessing extreme violence, including killing and rape during military operation, and are themselves survivors of sexual violence. Today, they continue to live in unsafe refugee camps with limited access to healthcare and education, while facing ongoing trauma, discrimination, and little access of justice or protection. I work closely with Rohingya women, specifically widows, single women, and survivors and girls living in the refugee camp, and their life experience are shaped by displacement, trauma, and ongoing uncertainty about their future. Many of the women I met fled Myanmar after witnessing or experiencing violence, losing loved ones, and leaving their home behind. They arrive in the camp with very little, often carrying deep physical and emotional scars. I met 80% women who are widow and children are killed in 2016, and same thing happened in 2017 and still is ongoing. Today, life in the camps remain extremely challenging. Families live in the overcrowded shelter made from only 5 or 6 bamboo and one tarpaulin, often with very little privacy. Women and girls manage the daily responsibility of caring for children, cooking, collecting water, and maintaining their household in very difficult conditions. This community live in Bangladesh refugee camp for from 8 years, and still we cannot provide them a separate toilet for the women. Now, it is because the fund is now dispersing, but some organization they are now pushing about the separate toilet. But this is, cannot be happened because of the fund crisis. And we were struggling from the beginning because we saw so many incidents when the women are going in the toilet and they are educated and they are harassed, and also some women were raped in the dark in the night. So this is very awful for us. So we always giving the awareness about the issue, and we try to because I work with in the field level, and we are working with the women. We take so many action, we take so many things. Um, so this is only the limited resource, but we need more resources about the protecting, especially the young girls. For many women are women and girls, there is safety concern. We should be do so many things, and we are concerning about the CIC and the volunteer, also the Bangladeshi government, and it is only in oral commitment. Still, we didn't see, but what we are doing for our own, and the women who are once helpless, now they are they become a resilience, and they are the one who protect themselves. Even when I give the social support from the 2017, and they are now giving the others, and they're making their own group, and they are protecting their own self. Maybe this is very little initiative, but this is a very great change for the Rohingya camp. And another issue, the education. The Rohingya community deprived education for 2 decades. And it is a 2 years, 2 generation. And now again, the 8 year. In 8 year, we cannot, make any change for them, because we hope maybe next few years we will get some initiative about the education, and especially for there are some resources who are supporting Rohingya scholarship for the girls and boys, but in meantime about the fund crisis, the male scholarship is totally stopped, but female is less, but it still is happening. But one thing I can say, their hope and their strength, they're making their own society, and they try to support their own community for their limited knowledge. So those who are educated, not high educated, in secondary, they are giving yes, they have as a teacher, they are giving teaching to their children. And another issue that I already said, this the most of the women, they are traumatized, and they saw so many things. Even still, those who are coming from the Rakhine state, because the ongoing persecution is still ongoing. So women need psychosocial support for their mental stability, because this is a very big thing that I saw in my own hand, in front of me. Some are trying to suicide, some are already suicide, some are isolated, some are become, you can say, just quiet, the silent. So this is very big issue, because more than 1 million people in the small area, and more 55% women and children, most of the women, and they are in need special treatment for the everyone, even from their community. So these women are fighting with the situation, their own community, also the policy, also the ING's policy, also the government. So these women is facing the challenges, and also they are trying to overcome this. And I am so glad that I can represent this woman, because I don't have to say anything. They are the one who are expressing their own hope, their own strength, and own demand. Even the recently in Bangladesh government, help through the Bangladesh government and INGO, there is a civil society community, and they performed a political group, so they can raise their voice in the international level for their demand, because they are not citizen of Bangladesh, but they are citizen of Myanmar. And when the repatriation and problem arise and anything, the community member never be included in this discussion. So this group form, and this group are now forwarding for the demand, and they want to discuss with their own government, Myanmar government, and even now in the Rakhine State is ruled by AA Arakan Army, opposition, so-called revolution, who are also targeting the innocent Rohingya people. And one thing in common, Myanmar army and AA army is a common that they don't need Rohingya in the Arakan, in the Rakhine state. But one thing, Rakhine is also our land, because we are the Aborigine of this land. So we have the right to go back. So we need our right, our citizenship restored. So we have to fight. And another issue, the women should be in the table. They are not the backbencher, because they are the half of nation. So they should be in discussion table. They should be raise their voice. And I am my commitment that those who are surrounded with me, the women, they are slowly raising their voice. Even the last 2023 and 24, there was a situation about kidnapping children. The women, the few women, they are stand, and they patrolling the camp to protect their children. So this is the woman who can do anything. So I have hope. And another issue about this community need justice, and this community need to go back their own land, and they need justice. ICJ, ICC, and double and whatever, they just written, they publishing the draft, but practically we didn't see anything. We are not save a single person till in 2025 inside in the Rakhine state. Still they are killing, still they are raping girls, still they are harassing women in the border side, or inside in the Rakhine state, or outside in the Rakhine state. So this is a very difficult challenge. And I can say the situation is not similar. It is the same thing happened the other part of the maybe Congo, maybe Africa, maybe Palestine, whatever. But I can say the women need a special treatment, because they are the carrying the nation. So we women have to be strong. We women have to be hold our hand each other. We need to raise our voice. We are not the part of genocide. Our women who are facing sexual violence and atrocity, they are at against their this violence is itself a genocide. So they are not a product. They are a human being. They are not even a subhuman, and they are not just as a mother. They are the leader. And I believe the leader can lead a proper nation, and our women have that courage, but we need some collaboration with everyone. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Razia, for speaking for Rohingya women and girls. Some really important points made about the funding crisis, and particularly the importance of education, which has been deprived to women and girls for decades, and perpetuates this terrible issue through generations. Thank you for your points about the importance of civil society and activism, and the need for strength for Rohingya people. I will now move to introduce our next speaker, Rîhab Cebû. I would like to start by saying that Rîhab will be delivering her speech in Arabic. So if you require translated captions, please use the toolbar at the bottom of the screen. Rîhab Cebû is a Kurdish woman from the Sheba region near Aleppo. She has been displaced 6 times in recent years, most recently fleeing from Raqqa to Kashmir, where she currently resides. She was active in the Sheba Women's Association and subsequently worked for the regional authority and municipality. In Raqqa, she worked for the Women's Authority of the Democratic Autonomous Administration, focusing on child protection. She is currently a coordinator for Congress Star on the Sheba Refugee Council. As I say, Rîhab will be presenting in Arabic. Thank you, Rîhab.
لكم سعدت بلقائكم جميعا. شكرا جزيلا، وأشكر من ساهم في انضمامي إليكم في هذه الندوة. مرت سوريا بكثير من الآلام والمآسي 13 عاما من الصراعات والنزاعات داخل سوريا، إلى أن المناطق الخاضعة لسيطرة فصائل مدعومة من تركيا كشهبة وعفرين ساركاني رأس العين وأخيرا حيي الشيخ مقصود والأشرافية. فهذه المناطق تعد أكثر المناطق تعقيدا في المشهد السوري، حيث تتداخل العوامل العسكرية والسياسية مع الأوضاع الإنسانية والاجتماعية، وخاصة موضوع المرأة والطفل، فهو معقد ومتشعب مع غياب وجود الأوضاع الإنسانية والاجتماعية، لأنه يرتبط بتعدد القوى المسيطرة وسلطة الأمر الواقع أو الحكومة المؤقتة. فقد خلقت هناك بيئة هشة أثرت بشكل مباشر على الفئات الأكثر ضعفا وعلى رأسهم النساء والأطفال. فمنذ عام 2016 شهدت مناطق ذات الغالبية الكردية أو منها كردية بحد ذاتها الكثير من الصراعات، ومما أدى إلى نزوح الآلاف من العوائل من تلك المناطق. ومؤخرا ما حدث النزوح الداخلي الأخير الذي حدث مؤخرا لأهالي عفرين وشهباء وحيي الشيخ مقصود والأشرافية بعد الانتهاكات التي حصلت بحق المدنيين هناك. فعانت النساء وما زالت تعاني من مجموعة مركبة من التحديات والصعوبات، فقد اضطرت مجموعة أخرى من العوائل إلى العودة مجبرة إلى مدنهم ومنازلهم، ورغم أنها تعيش حالة من التخوف من العودة في ظل الفلتان الأمني الموجود في مناطقهم، تعاني النساء هناك من والنفسي، الاعتقال التعسفي والاختفاء القسري والاستغلال في ظل النزوح والهجرة وعدم وجود ضوابط ومحاسبة مرتكبي الجرائم. النزوح الداخلي واللجوء الأخير أثر بشكل كبير على النساء الأرامل، حيث فقدت كثير من النساء المعيل أو والمسكن والأمان، فأصبحن المعيل الوحيد للأسرة، وبعض الأطفال أيضا يجبرون على العمل والانخراط في أنشطة خطرة لدعم عائلتهم. فتعاني أيضا النساء هناك من القيود الاجتماعية، حيث فرضت في بعض المناطق اللباس، فرض على النساء اللباس والحركة والعمل مما يؤدي إلى ضعف في سيادة القانون. فضعف في سيادة القانون يؤدي من الحد من قدرة النساء على اللجوء إلى العدالة في حالات الانتهاكات التي تتعرض لها، تراجع الخدمات الصحية ومحدودية الوصول إلى التعليم والتأهيل المهني. ويعانين أيضا الأطفال الحرمان ويعيشون في أماكن تفتقر إلى الحد الأدنى من مقومات الحياة. فالنزوح المستمر والانتهاكات المستمرة وعدم وجود أمان واستقرار، وبالتالي عدم وجود الاستقرار النفسي والاجتماعي وفقدان الأمل أدى بالنساء إلى حالة نفسية سيئة وصعبة. فأكثر معاناة تعاني منها النساء في سوريا عامة وفي المناطق التي ذكرتها خاصة هو الفلتان الأمني الذي يسود المنطقة نتيجة تعدد الفصائل وغياب القانون والمحاسبة. ورغم وجود بعض المبادرات لتحسين الواقع، إلا أن غياب الاستقرار يفاقمان معاناة هذه الفئات، ومن هنا تبرز الحاجة الملحة إلى تدخلات دولية وإنسانية فعالة تركز على حماية المدنيين وتأمين العودة إلى منازلهم وأراضيهم. فقد قمنا مؤخرا في إعادة ما يقارب 400 عائلة إلى عفرين، إلا أن إلى الآن بعض العوائل لم تتمكن من استرداد أملاكهم ومنازلهم، وهم الآن دون مأوى، بالرغم من التواصل مع الجهات المعنية هناك لإفراغ منازلهم وإعادة أملاكهم لهم، إلا أنه لم يكن هناك نتيجة على أرض الواقع. فكثير من النساء تتواصل معنا بشكل دائم يطالبن بإنهاء الاعتقال التعسفي وضمان الحقوق الأساسية بسبب غياب المعيل أو رب الأسرة أو زوج المرأة الموجودة هناك. فيطالبن أيضا رغم تواصلنا وعند تواصلنا الدائم معهم في كل مكان تعزيز الاستقرار الأمني ووقف الانتهاكات وتعزيز الأمن ومحاسبة منتهكيه وبناء نظام قضائي عادل. فرغم وجود تدخلات إنسانية من منظمات محلية ودولية إلا أنها تواجه عدة تحديات، فغياب الاستدامة في المشاريع الإنسانية، تسييس المساعدات في بعض الأحيان، ضعف التنسيق بين الجهات الفاعلة، استمرار الانفلات الأمني الذي يحد من فعالية البرامج. فنحن بحاجة إلى تعزيز دور المرأة في المجتمع عبر مشاركة المرأة في صنع القرار المحلي، وإشراك النساء في عمليات صنع القرار، وتمثيل النساء في المجالس المحلية والمنظمات الدولية. فالنساء أيضا بحاجة إلى بناء مجتمع أكثر عدالة واستقرار، تشمل مطالبهم بناء طريق سياسي وإدارة سياسية فعالا، وبحاجة إلى تدخل إنساني أو سياسي يسعى تحقيق تغيير حقيقي. فمن دون الاستجابة الجادة لهذه الضروريات سيبقى الواقع على ما هو، وستبقى النساء الأرامل عرضة لمزيد من التدهور مما يهدد مستقبل الأجيال القادمة. فهذه المطالب ليست احتياجات آنية، بل هي حقوق أساسية يجب الاعتراف بها والعمل على تحقيقها ضمن رؤية شاملة لإعادة الاستقرار. فحصلت عدة انتهاكات مؤخرا وأخيرا عندما كان دخلت هذه الفصائل إلى حيي الشيخ مقصود والأشرافية، وكانت أكثر النساء هناك، أكثر من تعرض للانتهاكات هم من النساء والاعتقالات أيضا. فكان هناك الاعتداء الجنسي، كان هناك القتل بطريقة وحشية ودون توثيق، فالقليل من هذه الانتهاكات تم توثيقها. فمطالبنا أيضا بتوثيق هذه الانتهاكات ومحاسبة مفتعلي هذه الجرائم التي تعد هي جرائم حرب بحق الإنسانية. فإلى الآن لم يتم إثبات أو توثيق هذه الانتهاكات التي حصلت وما زالت تحصل إلى الآن في المناطق التي ذكرتها كشهباء وعفرين شرقانية راس العين شيخ مقصود والأشرافية.
Shukran, Rîhab. Thank you, Rîhab, for such a chilling account of the reality of displacement, including your own personal lived experience, the pain and tragedy of Syria for over a decade, the reality of the terrible consequences of widowhood, and the wives of the disappeared, also frequently referred to as half widows, with the absence of economic support, where there's a loss of wage earners, the weakening of the rule of law, limiting access to justice for women and girls, limited access to education and training, children deprived of the necessities of life, and the need for psychosocial support, initiatives that only exacerbate suffering, the urgent need for international intervention, arbitrary detention, and the need for representation of women at all levels, that no peace can be achieved without us, and that this is a fundamental right. Finishing with a disturbing account of the sexual assault and murders, the war crimes against humanity, which are not documented, which are not proven on record, and yet still occur. Thank you for sharing your intervention. We will now turn to Shamim Shawl. Shamim Shawl is an educationalist who started her career at her birthplace, Kashmir, Indian administered. She is a human rights activist committed to work for fundamental freedoms of all communities in general, but to native Kashmiris in particular. For this purpose, she has organized international conferences on critical issues, particularly on women and children, wives of the disappeared, commonly referred to as half widows, and widows' terrorism, and defending human rights in conflict zones. Thank you, Shamim.
Good afternoon. Assalamu alaikum to everyone. Thank you, Jessila, Dr. Jessila, Honorable Dr. Jessila. And thank you, everyone. My mentor, Margaret Owen who has introduced this word half widows internationally. And we are honored that Dr. Margaret Owen, Barrister Margaret Owen, is the great support, great hope for us that she is carrying the voice of unheard women to the international fora. I am thankful for you giving me the opportunity to speak today as we move into discussing the level and lived experience of Kashmiri women and children. Let us pause and consider the human cost behind the headlines. Since 1989, 22,991 women have been widowed and 100,807 children orphaned. Reports are documents showed that 11,269 cases of molestation or gang rape and an estimated 8,000 to 10,000 people have been disappeared during these operations by Indian forces. These numbers are not just statistics. They are present and represented lives disrupted, families shattered, and a generation growing up with fear and loss. There is a question of half widows, as I am always trying to present the case of half widows of missing persons. One of the most tragic consequences of enforced disappearances in Kashmir is the half widows, a woman whose husband has vanished but is never officially declared dead, living in uncertainty. 1,500 to 2,000 women face legal and social barriers. They cannot inherit property, access financial benefits, or remarry without stigma, trapped between hope and loss. Human rights researchers have revealed the grim reality of Kashmiri human rights activist Khurram Parvez, who is now in Indian Tihar jail with the Jammu and Kashmir Coalition Civil Society. He documented 1,080 extrajudicial killings and 172 enforced disappearances in his 2015 report known as Structures of Violence. Anjana Chatterjee, American author, through the International People's Tribunal on Human Rights and Justice, uncovered 2,700 unmarked graves holding over 2,900 bodies across 55 villages in Kupwara, Baramulla, Bandipora, and similarly, Dr. Bashir Ahmed Dabla in 2016 his studies shows how these disappearances leave 32,400 widows, 97,200 orphans struggling with poverty, trauma, and social insecurity. Representation of these cases are represented in literature. The experiences of Kashmiri women reflected not only in the reports of United Nations Human Rights Council, High Commissioner for Human Rights report, but also in literature such as The Half Widows in 2012 and The Half Mothers 2014, which portray the grief, uncertainty, and resilience of women whose husbands and sons are disappeared during the conflict. Behind these statistics are real lives. For example, Salma, she's a woman from Kashmir who struggled to raise 3 children after her husband disappeared, and Bano Begum of Dardpora, whose husband Salamuddin was killed in 1995, forced her to support her family through farming and daily labor. Daily labor, although Kashmiri women are not allowed because of the social customs and traditions, but they are now working in the houses to raise their children. The Kuran Poshpora of Rape village. Another important example of gender-based violence occurred on 23 February 1991 in a village of Kuran Poshpora during a cordon and search operation. Soldiers from the 4th Rajputa Rifles reportedly numbering between 400 to 1,000 detained male residents outside their home while women remained inside, and testimonies along with human rights reports state that over 100 women were raped or sexually assaulted during that night. There is no accountability because of the impunity. Now, what is the solution? The question was raised, what we can do. I think to bring these numbers, and the important question is that actually we have to do something to improve the situation of women and girls. First, there need to be independent and transparent investigation into the cases of enforced disappearances, sexual violence, and other human rights violations. Without credible investigation, justice cannot move forward. Second, legal frameworks that provide impunity or protection from prosecution should be reviewed to ensure that all institutions remain accountable under the law. Third, there is also an urgent need to support women who are already living with the consequences of conflict. Programs that provide financial assistance, educational opportunities, and legal support for widows and half widows and for their children to help and reduce their vulnerability. The international community can also play a role. My friends here present in this webinar, they can play a role, and Margaret is also fighting the case of half widows. She is our voice. The role by encouraging continued monitoring of human rights conditions and supporting organizations that document abuse and assist survivors. Finally, I believe ordinary citizens, researchers, and journalists can contribute by raising awareness about the lived experience of Kashmiri women, ensuring that their stories are not forgotten. Because ultimately, addressing the issue requires not only policy change, but also greater attention to the voices and the experiences of the women themselves. 10,000 women or young girls are missing. It is the report of Home Minister of India in the lower house, is known as Parliament. Where these girls have gone? We believe that they are used, these girls, for human trafficking or for taking the drugs from one state to the another or from country to countries. Therefore, it is the case is with you. I appeal this webinar, those who have organized this webinar and those who are present here from the different parts of the world. When they speak about the women, they speak about the Kashmir. Please don't forget us. We are under 900,000 army with sophisticated weapons. We have no voice, but our voice is the women of the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Shamim Shawl, for speaking about Kashmiri women and girls and their plight. that 10,000 young girls remain missing, that there is no accountability for their loss, for the impact of social customs and traditions, for the grief and uncertainty and resilience that they must endure, for the tens of thousands of widows and wives of the disappeared, for the tens of thousands or entering 100,000 orphans experiencing poverty, trauma, insecurity. Absolutely, we echo your calls for independent investigations into their disappearances and into sexual violence, and for not only review but removal of legal frameworks enabling the impunity of offenders. Our next speaker is Raghda Daboub. Raghda Daboub is a gender justice practitioner with over 15 years of experience in the non-profit sector in the occupied Palestinian territories. She currently serves as Gender Justice Program Manager at Oxfam in the occupied Palestinian territories, where she leads programs advancing women's rights across the West Bank and Gaza. Her work focuses on key areas including women, peace and security, gender-based violence, sexual and reproductive health and rights, and the recognition and valuing of women's work. Raghda holds a master's degree in Gender and Development Studies from Boise University and a post-professional diploma in Gender Equality Studies and Training from the University of Iceland. Throughout her career, she has worked with national and international organizations to design and lead initiatives promoting the social, economic, and political empowerment of women and young people. Raghda, over to you.
Thank you, Natalie, and thank you for having me and for organizing this important webinar. So I will speak about the realities that Palestinian women face every day under Israel unlawful occupation, sustaining life under extremely hard conditions. What we witness of violations are not isolated incidents. They follow patterns that international law recognizes as war crimes and acts of genocide, specifically in Gaza. They also occur within a broader environment of militarization and impunity, as the fellow panelist mentioned, where violations by the occupation continues without accountability. What I will present is just a brief illustration of the gendered impact of this occupation, a form of violence that has intensified and in Gaza has increasingly been described as a femi-genocide. So one of the most extreme expressions of this violence is the direct targeting and mass killing of women. From October 2023 up till now, we have 12,500 women have been killed in Gaza and 23 in the West Bank. This targeting sabotages the future of nation by targeting those responsible of reproduction, caregiving, and cultural transmission. Beyond these direct attacks, the occupation also enforces control through displacement and uprooting communities from their homes. In the West Bank, for instance, we're facing home demolitions that are often justified by claims that homes lack permits that needs to be issued by the Israeli occupation, but these permits are nearly impossible for Palestinians to obtain. Demolitions often take place at night, forcing families to leave suddenly, leaving families, women, and children with trauma. In Gaza, the destruction is catastrophic. 95% of housing in Gaza has been either destroyed or damaged. This means that families live in overcrowded tents made from plastic sheeting, exposed to extreme weather, and severe shortages of water, sanitation, and hygiene. Women often carry primary caregiving responsibilities and must manage their family survival with limited resources. Under such conditions, you could imagine how pregnancy, childbirth, and breastfeeding, and even menstruation become daily struggles. Nowhere in this violence by the unlawful occupation is more visible than the attacks on healthcare and the reproductive life. In Gaza, the healthcare system is nearly collapsed due to the destruction of hospitals, the killing of health professionals, and the restriction of medical supplies. Almost 60% of medical points in Gaza is non-functional. Many women that we're working with forced to give birth in tents or overcrowded shelters without sanitation, medical equipment, or privacy. There have been also documented cases in Gaza where cesarean sections performed without anesthesia. The United Nations Commission of Inquiry conclude that the restriction of humanitarian aid to Gaza, coupled with the destruction of reproductive health care, have destroyed in part the reproductive capacity of Palestinian women, which falls, of course, under genocidal acts. In Gaza today, what we're witnessing is that even the act of giving life has become a site of violence. Starvation also has been used as a weapon of war. In Gaza, there are 37 pregnant and lactating women that are facing malnutrition, and then they will have like severe health consequences if they don't get treatment by October this year. So the violence that Palestinian women face also takes so many forms. It's also in the daily violence of occupation. For instance, part of the strategies also include expansion of Israeli settlement. These are lands that are confiscated by Palestinians. We're witnessing in the West Bank the highest number of internally displaced people since 1967. Also, Israeli settler violence has surged dramatically, creating coercive environment. It is one of the key drivers of forced displacement in the occupied Palestinian territory. Women who experience such violence are often left traumatized, and then they have to carry an additional emotional and caregiving burden, supporting traumatized family members while coping their own losses. There have also been documentation of gender and sexual-based crimes committed by Israeli settlers and then the Israeli forces aimed at punishing and intimidating Palestinians while forcing communities out of their lands. One final aspect in terms of what we're witnessing here is that thousands of Palestinians and human rights defenders have been arrested. Many are held under administrative detention without charge or trial. Reports also indicate that there is a systematic abuse, including sexual and gender-based violence. Women detainees have reported forced nudity, sexual threats, and physical assault. One woman described being forcibly undressed, beaten in her genitalia for 4 hours while camera recorded the incident. But despite this looming reality, I work with so many women's rights organizations in the West Bank and in Gaza. Palestinian women and women's rights organizations didn't stop working for a single day since the start of the genocide in Gaza. They are working tirelessly despite facing profound loss themselves. They say that we're here, we will stay here, and then we will continue to carry the communities and provide for people who are most in need. So what needs to be done? So we cannot speak about justice unless that we end the unlawful occupation, lift the siege of Gaza, and dismantle illegal settlements. States must fulfill international law obligations, including the 4 Geneva Convention and Armed Trade Treaty, preventing arms transfer that enable violations and gender-based violence. We need to ensure that there's accountability through national and international mechanisms of war crimes against humanity, and acts of genocide. We need also to make sure that we have a sustained support for Palestinian women's rights organizations, because they are at the forefront in terms of providing support, but down the line when it comes to accessing of funding. So because they are doing an amazing job in terms of the documentation of the human rights violation, survivor support, and justice efforts. We have to integrate also gender perspective and the reconstruction mechanism in Gaza. One thing that I can also just focus on is that feminist platforms and collectives can also play a greater role in terms of solidarity with feminists in Palestine, in terms of amplifying voices and opening platforms so that the Palestinian narrative can be amplified. I just want to conclude by speaking that when we speak about justice for women and girls living under occupation, we must recognize that without accountability, these violations will continue, and justice cannot exist under occupation. As long as the system of dispossession, displacement, and structural violence remains in place, Palestinian women will continue to live without protection and without accountability. Justice requires ending the structure that produces violence, and in our case, it is the occupation. Unless Palestinian women can live in safety, with freedom, and have self-determination, justice will remain unfulfilled. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Raghda, for your very clear action points too about what can be done. And for those of us on the call, often wondering what we can do, often so far away, the call to support, particularly for women's rights organisations, any funding that you are able to donate to support is always gratefully received and contributes to these efforts to support the women and girls experiencing such mass violence and the impact of occupation. I was really struck by what you said, Raghda, about the restriction of humanitarian aid, which has destroyed in part the reproductive capacity of Palestinian women and the impact that that has on the Palestinian people going forward. This is something that we must consider at the forefront of our minds. The impact of the violence, the extreme violence, the impunity for it, and the structural mechanisms that allow for its continuance, that we must have accountability to ensure that this does not continue. Thank you so much for your intervention. I will now move to introduce our next speaker, Clarisse Bahekwa Mwenge. Clarisse will be presenting in French, and therefore I would ask that you have your captions on if you require translation. Clarisse Bahekwa Mwenge is a member of civil society and defender of human rights in North Kivu, in Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo. Her commitment lies at the intersection of advocacy for peace, the protection of civilians, and the promotion of the rights of women and girls in context of armed conflict and humanitarian crises. As noted, Clarisse will be presenting in French. Thank you, Clarisse. Merci, Clarisse.
Merci. Mesdames et messieurs, le thème choisi pour nos assises de ce jour, les femmes et les filles vivant sous occupation, intéresse la République démocratique du Congo, pays que je représente au plus haut point. Je remercie les organisateurs d'avoir pensé à associer l'une des voix congolaises au travers ces assises. Je viens donc du Nord Kivu, dans l'est de la RDC, une région riche en ressources naturelles et en ressources humaines, mais profondément fragilisée par des décennies de conflits armés et des crises humanitaires. Les femmes et les filles que je représente vivent une réalité faite d'incertitudes quotidiennes. Elles vivent sous occupation depuis 1996 et elles sont prises en otage par plus de 250 groupes armés, étrangers et locaux, parmi lesquels le mouvement rebelle AFC M23, soutenu par le Rwanda, à la base de plusieurs violations des droits des femmes. Beaucoup d'entre elles ont été contraintes de fuir leur village à cause de l'insécurité, devenant des déplacés internes, souvent sans accès stable à l'eau, à la nourriture, aux soins de santé ou à l'éducation pour leurs enfants. D'après l'ONU, plus de 60% des déplacés internes en RDC sont des femmes. Dans ce contexte, les femmes et les filles sont particulièrement exposées aux violences basées sur le genre. Le viol systématique des femmes est une véritable arme de guerre dans le Nord et Sud Kivu. L'exploitation sexuelle et les trafics des filles, les mariages précoces demeurent des réalités douloureuses pour beaucoup d'entre elles. Ces violences ne détruisent pas seulement des vies individuelles, elles fragilisent également les tissus sociaux et économiques des communautés. À titre d'exemple, le 21 décembre 2025, Tabiobe Namialono, l'une des braves femmes du village Lamba Basilwabo à Makobola 2, a été violée par des hommes armés. Zawa Safi et Machozi Natingingwa, une autre fille de cette communauté, a été violée le 21 et le 23 décembre 2025. C'est le quotidien des femmes dans cette partie du pays. Plus d'1 million de femmes ont été affectées par le viol dans l'est de la RDC, d'après l'ONU Femmes. Mais il est important de dire que ces femmes ne sont pas seulement des victimes, elles sont aussi des piliers de résilience. Malgré les traumatismes, elles continuent de nourrir leurs familles, de reconstruire leur communauté et de porter des initiatives locales pour la paix, la solidarité et la survie collective. Dans le Nord et Sud Kivu, ce sont des femmes qui partent au champ et qui fournissent pour la plupart du temps nourrir leur famille. Nombreuses ont connu des viols en allant vers le champ ou soit sur le chemin de retour. Dans certaines parties du Nord Kivu et du Sud Kivu, plus de 55% des femmes sont des veuves des guerres. Depuis 1996, les guerres successives qui ont suivi ont produit un nombre considérable de veuves de guerre et de veuves à moitié dont les maris sont portés disparus à ces jours. D'après des Global Fleet Tract, les guerres successives qu'ont connues la RDC ont occasionné 6 millions de morts et en majorité des hommes, faisant de la RDC l'un des pays avec le nombre de veuves les plus élevés. Ces femmes sont malheureusement délaissées et n'ont aucune assistance du gouvernement. Certaines vivent de la prostitution pour subvenir aux besoins de leurs enfants et finissent par contracter des maladies vénériennes. Au moment où nous parlons, plusieurs femmes et filles sont toujours bloquées dans le nord et sud Kivu, contrôlées par l'AFC M23. Plusieurs ont émis le souhait de partir de ces villes, mais elles sont incapables de le faire car prises en otage. Ils ne peuvent pas quitter les zones contrôlées par les rebelles. C'est le cas de Madame Jacqueline Mousougani de l'organisation IFECIDI, qui se trouve en ce moment bloquée à Bukavu et tous ses mouvements sont contrôlés par les rebelles. Ce qui arrive à Jacqueline est le même sort réservé à des millions de femmes. La souffrance de ces femmes s'est accentuée davantage lorsque le gouvernement congolais a introduit une politique réservant un traitement particulier à l'immigration pour les personnes provenant des zones occupées par les rebelles. Les jeunes filles, quant à elles, grandissent souvent dans un contexte environnement où leur droit est fragilisé. Elles n'ont pas accès à l'éducation. Il y a une pression forte sur l'économie de leur famille. Elles n'ont pas accès à l'information et à plusieurs droits. Pourtant, elles portent en elles un immense potentiel pour transformer l'avenir de la communauté. Pour soutenir durablement les femmes et les filles dans des contextes comme celui du Nord et Sud, une action collective est indispensable. Tout d'abord, les gouvernements et les autorités doivent renforcer la protection des civils et lutter contre l'impunité. Les violences commises contre les femmes et les filles ne doivent jamais rester sans justice. La sécurité et l'accès à la justice sont des conditions fondamentales pour restaurer la dignité humaine. À ce titre, je tiens à épingler les jugements des justices exemplaires de la haute cour militaire et de l'auditorat militaire de ces dernières années dans les affaires des viols, condamnant des officiers, sous-officiers et soldats réguliers à des peines lourdes d'emprisonnement. Ce travail devrait continuer et s'étendre à des membres de groupes armés locaux et étrangers à travers une justice transitionnelle efficace. Le monde doit se mobiliser pour aider la RDC à tourner la page des guerres meurtrières et fratricides. La guerre qui dure depuis 1996 a produit toute une génération de femmes et de filles qui ne connaissent que la violence comme mode de vie. Il faut amener le Rwanda à retirer ses troupes de la RDC à travers des sanctions multiformes et essayer de contenir les ambitions hégémoniques des dirigeants rwandais, de sorte que l'histoire de la nation ne soit pas une répétition éternelle. Ensuite, il est essentiel d'investir dans l'éducation des filles et dans l'autonomisation économique des femmes. Lorsque les femmes disposent des ressources économiques, de formation et d'opportunités, elles deviennent des actrices majeures de stabilité et de développement dans leur communauté. Il est également crucial de soutenir les organisations locales des femmes. Ces organisations sont souvent les premières à intervenir dans les communautés touchées par les crises. Elles connaissent les besoins réels des populations et jouent un rôle déterminant dans l'accompagnement psychosocial, la prévention des violences et la promotion des droits. Enfin, les citoyens du monde entier peuvent agir, même à leur échelle, en s'informant, en soutenant les initiatives humanitaires, en amplifiant la voix des femmes et des filles vivant dans les zones de conflit et en rappelant aux décideurs que la dignité humaine ne doit jamais être oubliée. Investir dans les femmes et les filles, c'est investir dans la paix et la justice et l'avenir de nos sociétés.
Merci, Clarisse. Thank you, Clarisse, for discussing the Democratic of Congo, DRC, and the it's just stunning fact that more than 60% of those displaced in DRC are women. Again, with clear action points about what can be done to support, including by us, civil society. The support of women's rights organisations has been mentioned again, often the first to intervene. The importance of support for funding support for psychosocial support on the ground, that we must look to support humanitarian initiatives, and we must mobilise to support. I was shocked by the statistic that you raised that more than 1 million women have been affected by rape in DRC. But despite their traumas, they continue to be pillars of their families and communities. That DRC is one of the countries with the highest number of widows, and yet women received little to no assistance at all from the government, forcing them often into prostitution, and with no access to education, no access to information. Thank you, Clarisse, for sharing your intervention.
It was so important to hear everything you said, and particularly your conclusions about the impact of war and what it means, what war means in the real world. We hear limited visions of what war means, and those limited visions do not incorporate effectively all those consequences of which you have spoken. And it reminded me of Security Council Resolution 1325 and the lack of effect that Security Council resolution has had. That is, there has been some impact, but if women were brought into the scene, at the table, as they say, before wars began, at the time when it's possible to discuss effectively and properly the way that conflicts develop and the way that conflicts can be ameliorated without going to war, we would then see a very different world and a very different consequence, different from that which has occurred in Ukraine and Russia. So thank you so much. And now I'd like to turn to Dr. Natalie Turney. Dr. Natalie Turney is a corporate lawyer teaching law at the University of Reading here in the United Kingdom. She is now co-chair, together with Kat Sutherland, of the UKCSWA, that is United Kingdom Civil Society Women's Alliance. She, Dr. Natalie Turney, and Kat Sutherland have taken over co-chairwomanship or co-chairship of the UKCSW Alliance in the event of Zareen Hansworth having stood down from the chair, which she, of course, Zareen, held with enormous energy and great aplomb. We do know that Kat Sutherland and Dr. Natalie Turney will continue in that vein in running the UKCSWA. Natalie's expertise in company law and corporate law is really vital to advancing women's rights. And now I hand over to Dr. Turney for her summation of the campaign for a special rapporteur at the United Nations. So over to you, Dr. Turney. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jocelynne, for your very kind introduction. So I will speak about the campaign that UKCSWA has for a UN Special Rapporteur, which is less so about corporate law, but I will echo some of the points made by panelists today about accountability, because it's important that corporations are held to account too, and that they are also supportive of women and girls living under occupation and their freedom. So in background to our campaign, in March 2025, the UK Civil Society Women's Alliance, a network organisation of civil society and NGOs within civil society, attended the 69th session of the United Nations Commission on the Status of Women, also known as CSW69, in New York City, where we advocated for the interests of women and girls across the world. And in fact, we still have members of the UKCSWA in New York City from the 70th session of the Commission on the Status of Women, which is ongoing, and the theme is access to justice, hence our event today. So at CSW69, a working group was convened to investigate the issue of women and girls living under occupation, which is, as we've heard today, a matter of particular concern impacting areas across the world. Our working group conducts research into the position of women and girls living under occupation and advances a campaign seeking the creation of the role of UN Special Rapporteur for women and girls living under occupation. So in this endeavour, we are seeking to address gaps in representation of these women and girls. To give a bit of background about the Special Rapporteur role, Special rapporteurs are independent experts appointed by the United Nations to monitor and report on human rights issues worldwide, and they regularly report to the Geneva-based Human Rights Council and to the UN General Assembly in New York. They are appointed under the special procedures of the Human Rights Council and serve in their personal capacity. They are not UN staff, and they receive no financial remuneration for their work. Instead, they receive reimbursement of expenses and logistical support from the Office of the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights. So, as noted by Razia Sultana, an author on this, the work of special rapporteurs is critical in promoting and protecting human rights in some of the most difficult circumstances and on some of the most challenging issues. Their work is impactful in affecting policy and law change. For example, Professor Margaret Satterthwaite says that with she was the special rapporteur on independence of judges and lawyers. She worked directly with Montenegro and Mongolia on official country visits to address the matter of independence of the judiciary, and positive outcomes ensued. At present, there are 40 to 50 special rapporteurs, but none of them focus exclusively on women and girls living under occupation. The existing special rapporteurs are confined to their mandates and their own capacities to fulfill their roles. Some have reported using personal savings to fulfill their mandate to ensure that they maximise their effectiveness while maintaining independence. And this demonstrates the limited capacity to provide dedicated focus on the issue of women and girls living under occupation within a broader mandate. There are many existing special rapporteurs that may interact with the issue of women and girls living under occupation while fulfilling their mandate. For example, the Special Rapporteur on Human Rights of Internally Displaced Persons, the Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women and Girls, the Special Rapporteur on Trafficking in Persons, especially women and children, the Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in the Palestinian territories occupied since 1967, and more. And each of these may tangentially or directly touch on issues impacting women and girls living under occupation, but none of them directly address as an exclusive area of concern women and girls living under occupation. But it is clear that these women and girls face circumstances and issues that arise explicitly due to their status as under occupation. It is clear that, considering the nature and scope of the special rapporteur role, the matter of women and girls living under occupation would be well addressed by a special rapporteur. It is also evident that there is a major gap in the representation of women and girls living under occupation within the register of existing mandates. So the working group has requested the support of the UK government through the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office to request the creation of this role. For some context, the UK government is presented here with an opportunity to address various commitments set out within its National Action Plan on Women, Peace and Security between 2023 to 2027, wherein it has made commitments to international conventions without requirement for funding. This is an opportunity to demonstrate world-leading efforts to ensure the protection of citizens living in conflict zones and occupied territories, and to ensure the safety of women and girls living in pervasive patriarchal regimes. Our working group has the support of Emily Darlington MP, a Labour MP in the United Kingdom. The Honourable Dr. Jocelynne Scutt and I met with her personally in September 2025, where she made clear her support for our campaign. And she wrote in January 2026 to the Foreign Secretary, the Right Honourable Yvette Cooper MP, requesting her assistance. We await the Foreign Secretary's response, but we ask for your support in this campaign. You may wish to contact your own MP. I will close by just mentioning some of the things that Emily Darlington MP brought to the Foreign Secretary's attention. Emily mentions that there is a clear protection gap within the UN expert system and the heightened levels of conflict-related sexual violence, severe restrictions on movement, and systematic barriers to healthcare and food security, as noted by all of the panelists here today in terms of their real lived experiences of themselves and the women and girls that they're here to represent. This initiative is diplomatic. It requires no financial commitment from the United Kingdom, but it offers the United Kingdom an opportunity to demonstrate leadership on human rights without the need to take positions. So we ask for your support of this initiative. We are grateful for your support by attending today. If anyone would like to ask any further questions about how to contact their MPs or respective politicians, please do contact. But for now, I will return to the Honourable Dr. Jocelynne Scutt.
Thanks so much, Dr. Natalie Turney. Now we do have two comments or questions up in the Q&A. We are coming towards our end of time, but of course we will refer to these questions. First, Jacqueline Muscani has put into the Q&A her very great appreciation that Clarisse, you were here to speak. And she's also put a question up in the which is written in French, referring to the extreme situation in which women under occupation find themselves, and particularly in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Perhaps if you go to the Q&A and read her question, and you can then answer it, but I will come first to Nazreen Comert's question, which is related to all the panelists. And Nazreen says this: I would like to kindly ask all speakers what type of initial support they would find most valuable. In addition, says Nazreen Comert, I would greatly appreciate hearing suggestions for potential solutions or recommendations. So, over to you, members of the panel. Those who would like to respond, please raise your hand or come back on so that we can see you and that you would like to respond to the question. Of course, there were references to recommendations in the speeches, but it would be important to have further clarity on what can be done. So what type of initial support would you find valuable, and what are your suggestions for potential solutions or recommendations? What we will do after this seminar, it will be on YouTube, so people can watch it there. And we'll also make sure that the campaign that's being run by UKCSWA is made clear to everybody who's on the panel and to all participants, so that it will be possible to join this campaign and to make it a global campaign for the UN to respond to the demand effective demand that there be a special rapporteur appointed, which will be a beginning of looking at and making sure that women living under occupation and women living in the circumstances who are working together as networks, that can also be addressed. So now, thank you. Shamim, and then Razia, and then Eva. Please, Shamim.
Thank you so much. I will just quote the words of a survivor who was raped, and she was 80 years old. And it is mentioned in this book. It was wrote by the young girls of the University of Kashmir. And this is a complete comprehensive report on the survivors, why the army was not accountable because of the impunity. The Constitution, India, there was an amendment in the Constitution, they gave impunity to the army, therefore they are not accountable. The beautiful sentence for us as a community, women organizations, we know that if we remain silent, they would do it again. If not in our village, in our state, then anywhere else. That means if we will not, if we will remain quiet, if we will not raise the voice of all affected women, those who need support, help, especially from the Western world, the women like you, then they cannot get the justice. There will not be impunity, number one. Number two, there are two reports of United Nations Human Rights Council, the High Commissioner's report, 2018 and 2017. Both reports were rejected by India. They are not giving access to the special rapporteurs to Kashmir. If there is no media, there are no organizations, we cannot think about the support to these survivors, moral or material or psychological support. There are not trauma centers. But only one thing we can do is to raise voice. And when the women of the world will remain united, Indian society is very liberal. There are women like different organizations, they are working, but under these circumstances, since 2012, they are silent. They cannot talk about Kashmir. Like you have heard Arundhati Roy, a famous name in Kashmir, an author, a writer. She has been targeted and by the RSS. Therefore, they cannot speak up, but you can speak. I request you on behalf of the people of my country, people of the women of the Kashmir, to speak about it. Thank you very much. And have a comprehensive press release or something for the media, for the British media, for the British newspapers. You can, Dr. Natalie, you can write, because you are a lawyer and international law, what's the status of these half widows and widows? We can write about that. I have no access to that world. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Shamim. I want just to quickly, before I come to Razia, thank you for your comments about the issue of voices, because I've often thought that silence has two faces. There's the silence if women do not speak, and yet what we know is that women do speak, because there is the other silence, which is the failure of those who should listen, who must listen, to fail to listen. And that is the major silence that confronts women, because women's voices are sufficiently articulate to be heard. And we demand that the women's voices be heard through the special rapporteur, which must be appointed by the UN, and in other ways, as you have said, through the reports which do articulate what women are saying and which should be read, paid attention to, and acted upon. And to you, Raz, thank you, Razia, and then.
Thank you so much. From my side as a Rohingya representative, I know the UK government has shown leadership by funding protective help for the 1,000 Rohingya women, but funding for survival is a reaction. We need a protection. As the UN penholder on Myanmar, the UK must now lead the way in sanctioning the Arakan army leadership for this crime, for their crimes also, and also the so-called Myanmar. We must ensure that the preventing sexual violence in conflict initiative isn't just a policy in London, but a proactive presence in Butidang. The UK has the power to move the world from recording history and preventing a massacre. I think they can. There is lots of things they can do, but it's all in. I already say in the draft. But still, not only the Rohingyas suffering inside in the Myanmar, there are the other ethnic people still, and those who are involved in the Myanmar issue, they know very well about this issue. UK government have to be very strict on Myanmar issue. Whoever is Myanmar, whoever the other so-called revolutionary arms group. So the main thing is women issue should be in front line, because whatever happened, women are the most sufferers. So we have to prevent the women issue. Thank you.
Yes, indeed. Thank you, Razia. That this has been pointed out by all panelists, that impact on women and of women and the way that women survive and keep going and do more than survive, are resilient and are not giving up but are keeping on whatever the circumstances, and that really must be recognised, because in the end it is what holds the world together. So now over to you, Eva, for your response to Nesrin Comet's questions. Thank you, Eva.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Thank you for the question. I think I'd say the first, in terms of framing, not all crises are equal. Some get more attention than others. Some have more of a bandwidth within the UK, others more of a bandwidth in Francophone countries because of linguistics and colonial relationships and histories and other sort of cultural memory. So, when it comes to directing something, for example, the UK government, which I work with, quite often, I can definitely say that across the spectrum, not all get the same bandwidth, and that includes on things like resources, on funding, on airtime. Some appeals get filled the same day. The Sudan humanitarian appeal is still barely a third full. Other country appeals get filled on the same day that they roll out every year. And so I would say, what women-led organizations in the Sudan space really lack is funding, support, and visibility. And so a lot of it, is crowdsourced. A lot of it is, going to networks and essentially, bringing on supporters and patrons. So that would be the first thing. The other thing I'd say is that because of this slightly different, this sort of approach and political appetite for engaging with particular crises, and sometimes, political spheres will try to essentially pit crises against each other a little bit, even though that's maybe not what they want to seem to be doing. And so I think actually joint advocacy, turning up to a minister's office on this issue of a rapporteur, on the issue of violence against women, on the issue groups, together across crises, for example, with the UK Civil Society, Women's Alliance, those kinds of initiatives, I think, could be really important for solidarity, not just high level, but also for that co-learning together. So that's just my contribution, something to take away. Thanks.
So much, Eva. Yes, addressing this to every member of Parliament, every individual who has any power at any level at all is really important. And one of the issues that's become clear in this panel is that funding and support are what are lacking, and funding and support are what are needed and imperative. Now, Jacqueline put her comment in the Q&A about the impact of the occupation on women, particularly in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. So I'm wondering, Clarisse, if you would like to respond to that, or perhaps we'll go to Natalie for her response to Jacqueline's comment in the Q&A. Yes, over to you, Natalie.
Okay, no problem. And Clarisse, if you would like to say anything to this, then would happily give the floor to you. Merci, Jacqueline, for your comment. So Jacqueline's intervention was more a comment than a question, but raising further awareness for the plight of women and girls in the Democratic Republic of Congo. And so I would like to emphasize some of the points that she made in her message, that they face all forms of abuse and violence, being deprived of their freedoms and fundamental rights, that they live in fear of being subjected to critical situations such as abduction, arrest, enforced disappearance, rape, violence, and all kinds of abuse. I see that Clarisse is on the screen, and therefore I'd like to give way to Clarisse.
La situation des femmes dans l'Est de la République démocratique du Congo est très préoccupante, ainsi que la situation de la jeune fille. Cette situation demande plus des besoins en termes des actions concrètes, plus que des mots et des discours. Voilà pourquoi j'en appelle à votre aide, à l'aide des personnes de bonne volonté, pour que ces besoins immédiats tels que l'accès aux soins, à une alimentation saine, trouvent des réponses. La dignité des femmes de l'Est du Congo, du Nord et du Sud Kivu, c'est aussi notre dignité en tant qu'actionnaire, en tant qu'humanitaire, mais aussi en tant que femmes qui influencent certaines décisions au plus haut niveau.
Thank you so much, Clarisse. Thank you. And thank you, Jacqueline. And thank you, Nesrin, also. So it now comes to me to say thank you to all the panelists. Thank you particularly also to Natalie Turney and to Margaret Owen for the fact that this webinar has been able to be run during CSW, the Commission on the Status of Women 70. I'd just like to relate very briefly some comments in relation to each of the speakers. Dr. Eva Khair raised the issue of underfunding, which was a continuing theme throughout the webinar. And she also emphasized the role that exists for everyday citizens in terms of advocacy, particularly for government accountability, the need for support, and the need and the importance of challenging silence, and particularly invisibility of Sudan and what is happening in Sudan and the position of Sudan. Thank you, Eva. Razia raised the challenges facing the Rohingya and in denial of rights, including the right to education and to privacy in living conditions, which lead to vulnerability, loss of dignity, loss of safety and security. And she raised the importance of the right to live rather than simply to exist precariously. Rîhab Cebû related the violations of civilians coming with Kurdish displacement, arbitrary arrest, physical and psychological violence. She raised a theme that came throughout the panel discussion of the position of women, we would call it single parent families, the position of women who have responsibility for in the absence of the male member of the family, whether they have disappeared, whether they've been killed, whether they have been forcibly disappeared or tortured and imprisoned. She referred to women being forced to work in inauspicious circumstances and the lack of health and worker rights, calling for effective international engagement in humanitarian intervention to ensure a minimum of basic rights, including security, stability, and including the stretching and the importance of the role of women in decision making and equal participation. And she called for documentation of the violations and recording the realities of women and children and bringing them to the fore. And that's also a continuing theme, the importance of documenting what is happening, the importance of having statistics that are disaggregated so that we know the reality. And then we heard from Shamim Shawl about the experience of Kashmiri women and children and the human cost behind the headlines. 1,500 to 2,000 women face legal and social barriers, as do half widows, that is, widows whose partners have been disappeared, where the husbands are in that position, where the women are left. They therefore lack any security. They are denied access to any funds that may be held in the husband's name. She also referred to International People's Tribunal on Human Rights and Justice, and she referred to the importance of recognising and acting against to alleviate the poverty, trauma, the social insecurity, and she referred to the impact of social customs and traditions. Raghda Daboub referred to the targeting of Palestinian women in Gaza and in the West Bank, both severe water shortages, the damage to buildings, to the total infrastructure in Gaza, the destruction of the hospitals, housing, the educational institutions, and all the buildings. She also referred to maternity as a site of violence, including caesarean births without anesthesia. She referenced sexual and gender-based violence as common, and women's bodies being violated in so many ways that this treatment is truly unimaginable. She called for sustained support for Palestinian women's organisations and the accountability of those responsible for violence and for the denial of human rights and for the human rights violations. Clarisse Bahekwa Mwenge referred to the issue of the DCR, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, lack of access to water, a recurring issue, lack of access to food, denial of education, vulnerability to gender-based violence, including systemic rape. She referenced also to King and the violation to women's rights, dignity of the person, and women's psyche in trafficking, as well as other forms of gender-based violence. She spoke of 1 million women having been raped as recorded by the UN Women. And we know that any of the records do not speak of the totality of the violence that is inflicted on women in the DCR and globally. Also, Clarisse emphasized that women are only victims. Women are survivors, and women are more than survivors, she said. They are pillars of resistance and pillars of resilience. Yet again, she spoke of lack of funding, lack of support from government, lack of accountability and restriction with young girls being subjected to the unprivileging of their rights so that they have no access to education and the fact to recognise their rights as equal human She did highlight the rulings of the High Military Court and called for the importance of world mobilization to ensure restoration of rights, including the removal of Rwandan troops from the DCR. Spoke not about occupation, but about women in Ukraine and Russia, and the importance of recognizing women's networking and the impact that the situation in Ukraine and Russia, the situation that has arisen for women. She spoke of the need for humanitarian alleviation conditions there. She spoke also about access to law and the fact that if your documentation, which is Ukrainian, is not recognized and you need documentation, get it. And then if in another situation the Russian is not sufficient, what is your status? You are rendered effectively into a non-voice, into a non-person, into a denial of humanity and your very existence. She also referenced the issue of the destruction of infrastructure and how that leads to a position where women have no access to savings, no access to food or sanitary needs, and this issue of being in a legal vacuum. Every speaker I thank sincerely, and Natalie for her summation on the campaign to gain a UN special rapporteur in this field. So I thank you, and I therefore conclude this webinar with, as I've said, great thanks to the panel, with raising all the issues so articulately and passionately as you have, because one of the issues here is that we need passion. The more passion there is, the more we will recognise and acknowledge these issues as vital as they are. And I would like to conclude with some words that were written some 250 years ago in a publication that came out of the United States called The Revolution. On the 18th of November, 1869, Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony said, "The demands for women everywhere today are for a wider range of employment, higher wages, thorough physical and mental education, and the civil rights of property, wage, and children. No of citizen, by men or women, ever feel a proper respect or demand the respect of others until their political equality, their citizenship, be fully recognised. Women referenced by this panel have severe challenges to citizenship, to the nature of being human, to which every single one of us is entitled." I conclude on those words of Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony with thanks to you all. Thank you. And thank you to those who listened in and watched. Thank you.